Hey, good evening, everybody. Before we get started, I just wanted to say that the state of our comic art union is strong. And yes, we are up against the State of the Union address tonight. It's a scheduling snafu on my part, but I know that we're going to have a great turnout and we're going to have a lot of fun. And we're going to talk to two incredible collectors and business people in this in the industry that have a long history with comics, comic art, and also working with comic artists. So I'm not going to delay and leave them in the green room any longer than I have to. I'm going to bring in Joe and Nadia Mannarino. Good evening, Joe and Nadia. How are you doing?
How are you?
How are you?
Oh, fantastic. How about yourselves?
Very well.
Very well, thank you.
Great, great. After we had our, the best of celebration and everything, last month, I mean, I think we both knew that we wanted to do this again. I know you're both excited to be here with me this evening. But the one thing from when we talked after the show, and it's something that I'm sure I think I've tried to relate this to everybody in the audience, is that this is definitely going to be a multi-part interview because there's so much that we could talk about that we know that there's so many different kind of facets to your career that like I told you guys when we got started, I wanted to focus on your story as collectors and and how you got involved in comics to begin with, and then we can. That's going to tie into a lot of the business related discussions that we might touch on tonight and probably we'll touch on more in future chats. But we always start these collector interviews off with your origin story. And, initially, how did you discover comics and how did your, comics, your love for comics turn into a passion for the arts and art collecting, whether it was comics, illustration art, and strip art?
Well, Joe, it's your origin story first. You're older than me.
Well, I grew up in Queens, New York, and even though my mom and a lot of my family were born in America, I lived above my grandparents and underneath an uncle and an aunt, and everyone in the house spoke Italian as their main language. So when I was getting ready to go into kindergarten, I didn't speak comfortably English that I felt. So next thing you know, I'm looking through a comic book and I noticed that with the pictures, I could relate to the words and it helped me to read. So the comics were very important to me. And I started reading and to put it in perspective, I bought Spiderman #1 off the newsstand. And that wasn't the first thing that I collected. I mean, I was reading Richie Rich and Harvey comics mostly because where I was getting books, they didn't have a big selection of Dells and things like that. It was more of the Harveys and stuff like that. So I started, I remember a cousin giving me a copy of a Superman Annual #1, which was probably the first superhero book I ever read. And that was like 1960, 61. But I still liked the more, childlike things, and then I got into Marvel and superheroes, and that's it. I was off. I quickly went from that to trying to put together back issues. I mean, people talk about conventions and the early days of fandom. Well, when you grew up in Queens, in New York, there were so many bookstores, just about everywhere, used bookstores, that you could go there and they had paperbacks, they had the Hardy Boys, they had, things that were of interest to me, and they had used comics. And if you brought them a comic, they would pay you 2 cents and you could buy any back issue for 5 cents.
Just like now.
So,
wow. Just like returning soda pop bottles or something.
That's exactly what I did. We, in Queens, the World's Fair was being built. So there was new construction all over the place. And I would go to construction sites and get with a wagon and get soda bottles and then turn them in and then buy comic books. Every Wednesday I was there. So that's basically, how it all began. And then going to the bookstores and, I was reading recently that Robert Bell was in Woodside, in Woodside, Queens. I remember going to a used bookstore in Woodside, Queens, but it wasn't a bookstore. It was like a thrift shop, and that's exactly what it was called. And then he went on to become a dealer, and Rogalski and guys like that. So literally, you didn't need to leave to you know, it never really occurred to me to go into Manhattan to go to some small show. So that's how it was right through to, you know, the early 70s. And my favorite was Spiderman. And, you know, again, in my neighborhood, we had different kids. And if you were either a Spider-Man fan or a Fantastic Four fan. It wasn't like both. It wasn't even Marvel and DC. If anybody was older than me, they were into DCs because there were no Marvels.
Sure.
And they would argue with you to the death, you know, of DC Comics over a Marvel, you know. So that went on until like even in 1968 when Marvel, you know, got their new distributor and then expanded their comic line. By then already, I started buying multiple copies of every book. I had you know, I bought 30 copies of Captain America 100, Iron Man 1, you know, Conan 1, you know, all of the books that were coming out at that time. It continued, like Spectacular Spider-Man 1. By the time that came out, I bought 500 copies.
Oh my God.
So, and
where were you storing all these comics at?
See, now that's the secret. That's the big one. That's a good question. If I'd have kept them in my house, my apartment, they'd have been gone. My mom was a clean freak. My father hated comic books. But because I lived over my grandparents, I would read my comics at my grandparents and keep them there. My grandparents would never throw anything of ours away. So that's how I still have my original comic books.
Dang. That's incredible. So that was lucky then that your father wasn't around to you know, grab them and toss them.
Well, but you know, I was also smart enough to know I didn't want them to be tossed. So,
well, when you're buying that many copies, yeah, important to have that happen. Yeah. So I take it you weren't trading in a lot of copies when you were buying the new ones. It sounds like you kept most of the books that you were.
What I would do is I trade books, like I trade the Harveys and things like that, things I didn't care about to get the issues I wanted. I mean, I ended up putting together runs of every Marvel title, FF1 and up and Spider-Man 1 and up, all of the books. Amazing Fantasy 15. I remember getting Amazing Fantasy 15 because there was a guy in the neighborhood that had, before the days of regular recycling, he would go around and pick up paper and then bring it to a paper recycling place. And when he found out that I liked comics, he would stop and ask me to come and go through the comics that were in the truck. Now, people think that it was easy to collect back then. I watched your interview with Pat Kochanek.
Yeah. It
wasn't. You couldn't get, I mean, even though Amazing Fantasy 15 was only a year earlier or something like that, whatever it was, you couldn't get it. I mean, these Golden Age, I barely ever saw a Golden Age title. They were very, very difficult.
That's hard to imagine. I mean, you would think that they would have been very easy to pick up back then, but it wasn't the case. Nope. Even where you were at, I mean, you would think, you know, living around New York, that you'd have much easier access to those sorts of books.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was because it was more, you know, I mean, Queens is a suburb, it's not Manhattan. I'm sure people in Manhattan don't have space to keep this stuff, and that was more accessible to people, but not where I was. And then that leads me up, just to go quickly through it. So I would trade. I would go to comic stores with my brother. I have a younger brother who's a year younger than me, and we'd go together and everything else. But, you know, it was difficult because that had to all be public transportation or I had to beg somebody to bring me. You know, you know, it wasn't like I drove at that point. Then started high school, and that's where Nadia enters. We met in our junior year of high school. And Nadia had skipped a grade. She's a year younger than me, and she, you know, speaks 5 languages and was like a valedictorian, the whole bit. So the only reason I bring it up is that we met because in French, we had a French class together. And I hated language. I mean, I wasn't a bad student, but I hated language. So I was the guy, you know, all the way in the back where...
You didn't want to get called on.
Right.
Yeah.
And Nadia was the best student in the class, and the teacher put her in the back so that she wouldn't dominate the class. And that's where we met. And from that point on, once I was old enough, which was only in a year or so, I got my license, and next thing you know, we're driving around.
Yeah, we drove around to all kinds of stores, and today we're going to go and hunt for this, and the next day we're going to go and do this. And we met very young, and we were just learning about each other's interests. I came from a completely different culture, so it was very interesting to me, all this kind of stuff. And he would explain it, and I could see the passion in him, that he just wanted to go and get material that meant something to him. Then he'd investigate what came first and what came after. And it was very, very, very interesting. And it led us on an adventure that we're still on. So it's pretty cool. It's a good story for us.
No, it sounds like one. And a couple of questions from the audience. One was, how were you able to find so many copies of anything? W. Hunt says he was collecting, or they were collecting that early, and could never find more than 31 copies of anything. And Ardath also would like you to answer, what did Nadia think of you as a comic collector, and how did you explain it to her?
Well, as far as buying multiple copies, I found that they would advertise the coming of a first issue, like a Captain America 100. If I told the guy at the candy store or the newsstand and asked him if he could get me extra copies, he could. So he would tell the distributor, and they would bring an extra X number of copies for me. Now, I didn't ask for 30. I asked 50, and I might get 30 or something. But that's what he would do, and he would bring them specifically for me, and they weren't off the newsstand, if you know what I mean.
Straight from the distributor, then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I think. Well, go ahead.
It was interesting. I had never been exposed to anything like that, but I found it very, very interesting. I liked. For him, it was the chase. It was the hunt. He was looking for this. He was looking for that, and it was very methodical about it, and very disciplined. And he would, we weren't working or anything at that time, or even if we were, maybe we were at the supermarket or something, making $1.50 an hour. But he was very methodical. He never spent more than he made, and he would always, do deals in our own limited way. We were doing deals. And at the end of the day, it was quite satisfactory. You went around, you got what you wanted, and maybe you made a little money on the side. And well, that's pretty cool. It was a fun day, and that's what I thought about it until I got to be involved more and more in it, and I appreciated it even more. So, yeah, that's it.
I will address something that we are asked all the time, and I'll say something controversial. People always say, well, how did Nadia get so, I can't tell you how many collectors have come over to us at conventions or call and want us to meet the spouse.
It's mostly guys, though.
Yes, the guys want, because they're hoping that the wife will become interested like Nadia was interested, because some are very, shall we say, unhappy with the other when it comes to their collecting habits. And I always try to explain that it really is how you approach it in many regards. If you come across as the ultimate geek, and that it's all about trying to explain the condition of this book to the next book, and the staple and the corner, and the why you're so passionate about this centering and this over the next, you're going to lose anybody in any field. You're never going to go. If you look at it as most collectors are, people always would say to me, other collectors, well, let's face it, we all have a screw loose. I don't believe that. I don't believe that there's anything different. I think every collector has an archaeological gene in them.
It's a dig.
They love the past. They love the history. They love finding out about the character, about the history of the where it began, going back, and that's why so many people end up, especially in comic art. I mean, there are people who say I've never read a comic book, but I collect comic art. I don't understand that, because I never met a collector who didn't begin either with a nostalgic connection to what they were doing, or that they were given something by someone, and then they started to research that something.
Yeah.
Jim, is that Jim Ward? Who's
Jeff?
Jeff
Wedding. Jeff Wedding is an actual archaeologist
and
an art collector. That's why he was saying that. Yeah.
There you go.
And it was his 50th birthday yesterday. So
happy
birthday to Jeff.
Yeah. So if you look at it from that and you embrace it as that, I mean, think about it. I mean, think about sports. I mean, I'm an avid sport fan. Does it really matter in the scope of life that somebody ran 90 feet, and crosses a plate, yet a million people are rooting for something that literally means nothing? Why? They're engaged in something and it becomes part of it. It's no different in collecting if you look at it. That's why, to be honest, I don't think I've ever met a collector who finished their collection. They move on to something else. And they always do it before they're done. It's always something
So have
else.
you. You've
Yeah,
gone to different things.
Yeah.
So many different things. So many things he collects. Too many things, but it's all good. It's all good.
So to both of you, do you remember that first piece of art you purchased? Because I mean, clearly comics were a passion for you. I mean, and I'm sure it was the art and stories and just as you said, the thrill of the hunt to find the pieces, the books that you were looking for. But what was that? What was that moment when you first decided to pick up a piece of artwork? Was it on one of the? Was it on one of these excursions?
Yeah, we didn't have any idea that original art actually existed. Joe, I believe, came back from a convention, maybe when was that?
Well, that's when I started collecting Disney.
Yeah.
But the thing with art was that the art that I would have been interested in, the Marvel art, it wasn't out yet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't find it. It was so rare. And, every person that I knew that collected comics and also collected art, they collected strip art.
Sure.
That was the main thing. I mean, if you go through a Russ Cochran catalog, I mean, what is the focus of it? Go through the Jim Steranko catalogs. What was the focus of it? And it was all about the strip art. And if they did have comic art, it was something that I know now it doesn't seem it, but then it was contemporary. John Buscema page in 1974. Who cared? I mean, who is this guy? He's brand new. I don't care about John Buscema. It's small size art. It's there was just there was no connection. So but then as I started moving backwards, I started getting familiar and developing friends in the industry that they would constantly be talking to me about comic art, and it grows on you. So I started buying a piece here, a piece there, strip art, comic art, Disney art. We had young kids. So they loved everything Disney. So I was an avid Carl Barks fan, and that's how I began. And then really, when I really got into it is when I started meeting professionals for the first time. I mean, I could jump ahead a little bit, but in the mid 70s, in the late 70s, actually, my first job out of college was working in sales for a major printer, and they did all sorts of printing. So my territory was Manhattan, and I immediately went to Marvel, Harvey, Ziff Davis, Dell, DC. And I went up there and I went into all of the offices and I was dealing with these people. And, I got to know all people from a different perspective. The other thing, and we were talking about this the other day, Nadia, why was I always comfortable speaking to professionals is because at one point, and you'll get this because I mean Albert Moy and other guys knew me back when I was doing this, and I was in management for a big company. I had hundreds of people working, salespeople working for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very comfortable walking into a Fortune 500 company and speaking to the board of directors. You know, it didn't faze me at all. And I'm walking in with my sales reps, training them and doing that. So speaking to Jim Shooter or Stan Lee, I mean, they were tiny compared to some of the people that I dealt with. So it was interesting, but I think that's what made it more comfortable for me from a business point of view, you know?
Sure. So, so do you remember the first piece you picked up, or it definitely would have been something along the lines of a piece of strip art, do you think?
I think the first piece would have been a piece of strip art, and then the first piece of comic art was Disney. It was a Disney cover. It was a Mickey Mouse covers. Some Dell art came on the market, and I was able to get some of that. And then I started getting some, actually I probably Golden Age art was some of my first, because to me, that was like, how did this exist? You never see anything like this. You know, and that was kind of cool.
Very cool.
We're now making sure our grandchildren are indoctrinated properly, and they all love Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and all that good stuff. So they're on the right track.
We're living proof that this hobby, that's the question we're asked. Is this hobby gonna, Joe, what do you think? Is this hobby gonna last, or are we at the end? This hobby is gonna last because it's no longer about the comic books. It's about pop culture. I might have said this in our other interview or not, but the reality is, I can't tell you how many new people that come into our, new buyers at Heritage. And when I get to speak to them, many have never read a comic book. What they're buying is a piece of pop culture. They know the movies, they know the TV shows, they know that kind of stuff. And it's like when we were young, our pop culture was James Dean and, John Wayne or whatever it was. Those days, those are gone. The new pop culture is this. So, when I go see my granddaughter, Lily and August and Luke and Andrew, what are they talking about? They have Captain America backpacks. They have they ask me to draw something. It's always a
Pokemon character.
Pokemon character.
Yeah, my kids are into that.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
all of that kind of stuff. So that's that. So that generation that's 2 generations from now.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I exposed my kids to original comic art from the early day, times of my collecting.
We did that with our children.
Try to keep everybody involved, and now they're all in creative, pursuing creative, pursuits. 2, one's in college, one just graduated college, the other one's junior in high school, but they're all involved in the arts one way or another, whether it's illustration or animation. So I mean, I think that as a medium, I think it will last. And like you said, there's enough people coming in at it from the other direction as well, who are just involved. They've, like you said, some of them haven't even read a comic book. I mean, I hate to say it, my reading of choice in comics is very limited these days. I mean, I probably read about 5 or 6 different titles a month, but not like when I was younger. When I've always felt like I had to buy at least 20 or 30 books every month that I was trying to keep up with. So things change over time, but it doesn't mean I don't love it just as much as I did earlier, or that I have a less appreciation. I probably have more appreciation for the books and the stories and the creativity that goes into them today than I did when I was originally reading the comics, because I have a better understanding.
It definitely changes your the perspective. I mean, look, the passion is still there. What I always say is, when it comes, people say, do you still read the books? Well, I say, yeah, occasionally I'll pick up a book and I'll look at something interesting. But honestly, between all of the story arcs and to me, the direction of comics in the future has to go towards, as it is in Europe, where graphic novels are the thing. They were doing the compilations, her Jay was, back in, the 20s, the 30s, they were
Right.
doing things like that. So when you go into any bookstore, the shelves are lined with comic material, but they're all graphic novels. And the reason is it doesn't have the shelf life. And for the money, I mean, look, I'll pick up a comic, I time myself to read it. The last one took 6 minutes. And I'm saying $5, 6 minutes. And if you're a kid, you could buy a video game that can last hundreds of hours. You've got to say, hey, wait a minute now. Let's be real about this.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, $5 for a comic is a lot of money today. I would agree with that. I mean, when it went from 35 cents, I started getting a little scared. When it went over $1, I started having to trim back what I was buying every week because that's a lot of money at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. When we were young and we were buying how many books a month? 30, 40 books a month. How many kids get a $200 allowance a month for comic books?
Not many.
Not
many at all.
You got to be a little careful.
So I agree. So I know that we were going to try to limit ourselves to an hour. We're almost at the half-hour mark already. So I told you, time flies when you just start talking, right?
You're having fun.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
and
we'll
I'm not used
long.
to talking, so it's.
Oh yes, poor the guy.
Well, you were just said you're used to being in front of the board of directors. So but maybe it's been a while.
No.
Well, why don't we? We have some photos, from your from past events or shows that you've been at, and I thought we could show a couple of those, and then move into some of the pieces from your art collection that you had sent me, either photographs of or some scans of. Is that all right?
Sure. Shoot.
All right. And just these are some of the, I guess I'm not even sure. You tell me about when this would have been. I mean, this is when I first met you, was around the time that you were setting up for All-Star Auctions at shows.
All-Star Auctions, I mean, a quick history of our, business endeavors. We started out as dealers called Comics and Stories back in the late 70s. In 1981, I had a comic store, and it was one of the first, high end in an expensive neighborhood. And then in the mid 80s, Christies and Sotheby's started dealing in animation and some collectibles. And they were after us back then to do a comic auction, but I never thought that the time was right. So it wasn't until 1991 that Sotheby's decided to do the, they got Jerry Weiss, and then Christie's really pressed me, and I said, okay. And so we then started working with Christie's, and we did that from 91
92 to 97.
To 97. And then we started All-Star Auctions. So
98.
This has to be from 1998, around that time, and up.
Yeah.
And that's right when I got started collecting original art. So
there you go.
And just another photo from that same
story
era.
Yeah.
See, now I like this picture. I've shown off a few pictures of from my youth where I had spread out comics of mine just because I wanted to admire them. But the comics that I spread out were more like, Man-Thing #1 and maybe something from Starlin, early Warlock or something. But this is definitely a treasure trove of comics in front of you for this one.
Yeah, that's after we bought. We knew Jerry Robinson for decades, and he asked me to do an appraisal of his collection, and of course that's another whole segment of our history. 35 years ago, we started doing appraisals, and Nadia became the only member of the American Appraisers Association licensed in our field for decades. So we ended up doing every appraisal for estates, donations, artists. I mean, you name it, we did it. And so at one point, Jerry wanted to, was willing to sell his collection, and I bought his whole collection. You see, there are 3 copies of Batman 1, a Detective 27, and multiple copies, and that's just a fraction of what we had. But if you Google us, you'll see that I had two pedigree collections named the Joe and Nadia Mannarino collection. We had every single Silver Age comic from 1947 on, and two complete sets.
Wow.
In addition, if you look up, you'll see that the highest graded Action 1 was my copy, a 9.0. At one point, I had 5 Action 1s at one time. Yeah,
that's incredible. And like you said, we're going to definitely talk about different time periods of your experience, but in later programming, everyone, just so you know, this is just part 1. Yeah. But we were hitting some high points to get the show started. So
the reason I sent you this one is just to touch that was the reason we ended up doing the Christies auctions, because the president of Christie's called me and said, Joe, I said, if you get something interesting, you might be able to entice us. She called me up and asked me to go up to the office, and they had this painting. And to me, this was the best Frazetta painting in private hands that the family had ever sold. So we auctioned this in our first Christie's auction. That was the cover of the first Christie's auction catalog. And I know he won't mind us saying it, but it was bought by Glenn Danzig. And then Glenn ended up selling it, and I got it from the guy he sold it to. So that's the only reason I put this, because it gives us the ability to talk about the beginning of Christie's.
Right. So this is in your collection today?
No, we actually
had it for a while.
And we have a very important client that absolutely begged me, and so I agreed to let them have it, with the caveat that I get it back at some point.
Yeah, Prince Namer asked, why is there 2? I just kind of stitched 2 photos together, everybody. I didn't want to.
Yeah,
I wanted to show them both holding it for.
Yeah, it was a very important time. Yeah, it was.
Oh my gosh, of course.
Yeah.
And speaking of Frazetta, there's a picture of you with Frank.
Yeah, I mean, we met Frank back, very early on, but then at some point we got a call from the Frazettas, and they asked us to come out to meet them, because they would like us to represent them. It was totally unsolicited. So, we went out and we represented them for over 25 or 30 years. Yeah. Right up until, Frank's death. Yeah.
Well, that's one time period alone that I think we'll be able to devote a show to.
So many stories, Bill.
Oh boy.
So many stories.
Yeah, no, and those I'd like to hear. I really would.
Yeah,
because,
they're a lot of fun.
But hey, there was a weird photo that got slipped into to the set that you sent me. I'm going to show it just, and maybe you can explain this to me. But who is that young man on the left next to me?
Yeah,
it's Albert's son, with his grandfather and his other grandfather.
Yeah. Yeah, let me give you a quick. You know why I sent that picture is that
been lost.
When we were at this party together, this was at Alex Acevedo's, which we had a preview and a party for Frazetta and everybody he worked with. And those parties were legendary.
They were so fun.
I mean, it was legendary. And so Albert said, you got to take a picture of, me with Frank. You got to take a picture with me with Frank. So I brought my camera and I took that picture. If I'm not exaggerating, he has asked me, you never sent me that picture. You never sent. I've sent it to him like 10 times, and he'll always keep saying the same thing. And there it is.
Yeah, I think
once and for all.
I'll send him a copy of it so he can stop pestering you.
Yeah, thanks.
I love that. I've seen that picture before, though. I don't know where. Maybe I've seen it online, but I remember seeing that before. But that's a classic one with Albert.
A great one. Yeah.
I've seen a few early pictures of him behind, at San Diego or maybe some other shows as well when he was first getting started, and doesn't look like him at all. Looks just like a young son of his.
Yeah.
I watched the Albert interview, and so he said that in 1983 he met Nadia and I. He remembers going to buying his first piece of art and everything else. I literally remember him being there, but for the audience, this is the true story once and for all. And this is of great interest, this one. So it's, I think it was like the November creation convention in 1983. And before the convention, I got a phone call from Steve Harrington, who was a dealer, but never did shows. And he called me up. He says, Joe, are you going to be doing this show? And I said, yes. He said, well, I'm going to try and get set up next to you at the show. There's a reason, and I'm going to surprise you. So okay. I'm setting up at the show, and Steve comes in with a pallet, a hand truck, with a pumps up, and literally a stack 3 feet tall of envelopes of all Marvel art. Dicko, Kirby, you name it, it's in this thing. And he goes, Joe, take a look at this. And he starts to unload it. And I'm taking stuff out, and I can't believe what I'm seeing. I had never seen any. If I saw 2 pages of oversized Marvel art prior to that, of like a Kirby or something, it was a lot. So he's unloading all of this stuff. And I said, Steve, and I'm like, what? I said, Steve, where did you get this? And then he said the magic words. Joe, fell off the back of a truck. And I said, what? And he goes, well, how much are you going to buy? I purposely set up next to you so I wouldn't attract a lot of attention. I said, wait a minute. I'm not buying anything like, I said, you're not worried that this is going to come back to bite you in the rear end? You think so? Okay. He goes, so why don't we do this? And he comes over to my booth and he starts going through the least expensive pages I have. And he starts buying, 30 pages. Mm-hmm. And the reason is he put out the art and he put all of the new art over the pages so that you wouldn't see that right away. So people are coming up at the show, and we're doing our normal business. I'm trying to stay cool. And then this is where everything takes a turn. A very well-known dealer, I won't mention his name, comes over, who I knew from when he was a kid. And he goes, Joe, what do you think? I mean, I'm dying. This guy was as big a fan as I was. And I said, listen, I told him the story, and he goes, no. Well, who was the guest of honor at that show? Jim Shooter. And I knew Jim Shooter from dealing with him when he became the editor-in-chief at Marvel. I knew Stan Lee before that, and then when Jim came, I would go up to the Marvel offices, and I was selling. So he goes, Jim Shooter. You got to go with me, and we'll ask Jim Shooter if it's okay to buy that art. And I said, what if he calls the police? And he says, Joe, he won't do that to you. I said, well, I'm not worried about me. I said, I'm worried about Steve. He says, you got to do this, Joe. You got so. I said, I'll do it under the condition that I make it a hypothetical. So we go online, and we're waiting to talk to Jim. Go up. Jim says, hey, how you doing? Good. I said, Jim, I got to ask you a question. I said, if Marvel art that has never been on the market before turned up on the market, what is Marvel's position? And Jim used to have these glides. He put that down. He puts that. He goes, well, he says, let me tell you firsthand that stuff has been given away. Stuff has been for years. Nobody really cared. And quite frankly, Marvel owns the art, not the artist. Because I asked him, I said, would it be a problem also with artists? Would we need permission? He goes, so he says, the bottom line is, no, we wouldn't do anything about anything that's already out in the field. That's already out, in the world of collecting. Well, the other guy took that as license to buy. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what he did. Me, I still was, because I knew the artists. And I said, this is, I feel real bad about it. I feel uncomfortable with this. So I did not. And then, if you're interested in this story, I'll take it to the next step, was that I used to, like I said, I worked in Manhattan. I used to go around to the different comic stores on a regular basis. So I'm over at West Side Comics, and a couple of guys walk in, and they have complete envelopes of original art. I'm there, and another well-known collector, I guess, I don't know if I should use his name.
Nope, don't use any names.
So he's there, and he goes,
unless it's Albert's.
He goes, Joe, these guys came in yesterday, and I bought, a complete X-Men book, and I bought a half of an X-Men book, and I told them I'm looking for, this, that, and the other thing, and these guys were coming back again. So these guys were they had taken out bought a price guide. Steve Harrington was in the Overstreet price guide. The stores were listed and they were just going around to the stores, and they were selling complete books at $100 a book.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the stuff and it turned out these guys were, either drug addicts, and they'd broken into the office building where the warehouse was, and they had taken stuff out until somebody discovered it and put a stop to it. But that's how that art came out on the market. Now,
I've heard parts of that story, not all together at once, but I've heard heard those stories before. I've heard Jim's conversation as well. That's what Shooter's stance was at the time. People have asked me to get Jim on sometime. I know that Jim, I could talk to Jim about a lot of different things, but that was one of the questions that people wanted me to ask him as well. Is that true? But but I've heard it from multiple sources that was really their position back then as well. So it's some of this is so. But we were talking about Albert. Now so all that's interesting. It's good that how did you first meet Albert though? Was he just a young buyer coming in?
Yeah, he was walking around at the show. I think that he walked over to Scott Dunbier, and it was only a handful of guys that dealt in art. And I remember him like, what is this type of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
You'd never seen it before, and it was new. But the reason I remember him is that he would be like, he started coming to every show, and he wasn't afraid to ask questions and things like that. I mean, he was a pain in the ass going back right from the beginning.
Excuse you.
Oh, I've said it a few times myself, so not directly to him. No.
Now, I do need to say one more thing. When we started doing, and that was like in 83, 84 that this occurred. When we started doing auctions and buying, I asked each artist if it was okay. When we were at Christie's, I went to see Steve Ditko. I knew Steve Ditko, and I went to see, and I asked him, and he told me, Joe, that's got nothing to do with me. That's Marvel stuff. God bless you. Do the best you can. And that's the only reason that we went ahead and auctioned material that came on the market. Sure. And when Heritage did their first Ditko, Jim, I don't remember if it was Jim or if it was somebody else at Heritage, but they called me, and then I think I put him in touch with Ditko, and Ditko gave him permission as well. Mm-hmm. So, that's just the way it was. And the most of the other stuff was coming on the market from the inkers that that got material back.
Sure, that's
a whole different story.
Yeah, no, and I know some of those stories as well. I've heard some of those stories.
Yeah,
as well.
Some of those are not too good.
No, they're not. But that'll be for another show. Yeah. But no, so we should probably look at some art. I mean, we're at the 45-minute mark. I know we're going to go a little over today, but I'd like to be able to look at all the pieces that you had sent me, because they're all really historic, and I'm sure all have really great stories to go along with them. So let's see. I'm gonna pick this. I don't have a scan of this one. I just the photograph, but I know this is an important piece for you.
That is the original pulp cover art for the first appearance of Zorro from All Story Weekly in 1919. And I love that piece because you talk about having a great story behind it. That pulp came out right at the time where Douglas Fairbanks Sr. and Mary Pickford were forming United Artists, the studio. And they decided they needed a really great product to launch the studio and be their first film. So they were going on a cruise together. I think it was their honeymoon. And Fairbanks bought all of this different material from the newsstand in search of things that could be possibility. And he reads that story, immediately wires in, and he said, buy this property immediately and then pull anything else from the stands. I want it. And that became the famous Zorro of Douglas Fairbanks Sr. And it all started with that. The pulp is extremely rare. So the cover is, incredibly rare. There aren't that many covers, period. By the way, that's being lit by an authentic Tiffany lamp.
That was Lori's question. Yeah, a real Tiffany lamp.
I told you. I collect
other things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Even Marcus said that lamp is cool. I mean, that's a clearly very important piece. I mean, like, I think when we were emailing, you mentioned, one of the first masked heroes, and
if you think about it, that's between maybe the Scarlet Pimpernel and Zorro, but there's no denying that Zorro was an influence on the dual identity and the mask and everything else. And look at the cover, and it was done by a noted artist, Monahan, who was one of the most prolific and well-known artists in that period
of time.
What years was this?
1919.
Wow. Just the idea that it's still out there is amazing.
Yeah. I've owned that for, 35 years.
Wow. Congratulations. That's beautiful. That is really beautiful. Let's see. So we're going to look at some, I know you've got a good story for these.
You have the Spider-Man 8 page?
I do. You want me to show that one first? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that'll lead to this. This is the splash of Spider-Man 8, and this is one of the splashes I have, but I like it because it's early, it's Ditko using 90% pen and ink, and it's that frail, thinner Spider-Man that we all love, and you can see, of course, his brushwork in the robot and all, but I love that piece. But then that leads you to the other piece that you have about what the real origin of Spider-Man is. And in recent years, some of the history of Spider-Man has come out. So you can tell, you can put up that slide you just had. Sure. If Stan Lee tells the story, it's that, he's looking for a new character, blah, 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 blah. And I, it's like the Disney story of I saw a mouse go up the wall, and Stan Lee once said I saw a spider go up the wall, and boom, Spider-Man. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. As we all know, Marvel had lost their distributor in 1957, and then superhero comics. People don't realize superhero comics basically every 11 years go out of vogue and go away. So if you go back to 1938, by 1949, Marvel timely discontinued every one of their superheroes. DC discontinued every superhero with the exception of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. And it wasn't until 1960 with the Justice League that, of course, superheroes now make a comeback about 11 years later. And so Marvel wants to jump in on the thing. And Martin Goodman asked Lee to come up with some things. Well, the story behind this is that in 1953, Joe Simon Harvey was thinking of launching some superhero comics, thinking that it might be time for that. And so Joe was working on some ideas and came up with the idea of Spider-Man. And the reason that this is penciled by C.C. Beck is that C.C. Beck had, Fawcett had just gone out of business, and C.C. Beck was available. I don't know if you have the picture, but I have I sent you a picture of the penciled logo that says Spiderman. Now,
I did.
that was underneath the stat. So this is Joe Simon on a large sheet trying all different names, Spiderman, Spiderman with a hyphen, the Spiderman, things like that, all the way down. That's why there's the glue stains on top. So Joe is going back and forth. He says, hey, wait a minute. There's so many, quote unquote man, Superman, Batman, on and on, that to try and change it up a little bit, he does the Silver Spider. And his brother-in-law was a writer for a lot of the Kirby and Simon and Kirby products. So he asked him to come up with a script, and you have an orphan boy, his parents had died, the whole bit. And they come up with the idea of the Silver Spider. He gets a letter back from the editor-in-chief of Harvey, Sid Jacobson, saying, I like the concept. I like the idea of an insect, but he says, I think this is a little too muscular. I think he needs to be wiry. I think he needs, and he writes this whole treatise on the character. But at the end, basically, he tells Joe, he says, but it can't be Spider-Man, because don't you know that people have a phobia about spiders? So they nixed the idea. Move ahead, 1957, Joe's approached by MLJ, the Archie people, and they want to try doing superheroes. Joe dusts, as he did so many times, he would reuse anything. He dusts off the artwork. He gets the artwork back. He sends it up to Archie, and he says, I'm not going to make the same mistake. And he changes it from the Silver Spider to the Fly. And that's how this art ended up becoming. That's how they ended up doing the Spy. But he kept the artwork. And this is the original artwork and the complete story behind it by C.C. Beck with Silver Spider and everything else. And I own the whole story.
That's awesome. So there's always a backstory. It was just something percolating for a while before it became.
And then, of course, I left out if you look in Joe's book, the guy that ended up inking the logo for Spider-Man was Jack Kirby. Joe had all the other material, but Jack took the logo with him when he went to California. And when Stan was looking for a new product, he brought in the Spider-Man, and he described everything that they had talked about back then. And Stan said, run with it.
Wow. That's a good origin story right there. I love it.
And all of that is documented and provable.
All right. So here's a very important piece of art too. Let me show this one here.
Oh yeah, this is another. I tried to send things that have some backstory to it, not just my favorite pieces. So in 1976, everybody probably knows the story of Siegel and Schuster and how they created Superman, but then went off to the war. And then while they were away at war, Jerry Siegel got to know this attorney, and the guy convinced him that he could get him the copyright for Superman. So he comes back from the war. They sue DC over the copyright of Superman, and he loses. So they go from, the most successful artists and writer team in the field to being fired and out. I'll spare you the rest in between, but jump ahead to 1976. Here's Siegel and Schuster literally living in poverty. Joe Shuster, had been almost blind from the very beginning, and so he was now a messenger in Manhattan and in dire straits. Well, the word gets out that Warner, who had just bought DC, is going to come out with the first Superman movie. And they're getting a tremendous amount of publicity. So Jerry Siegel writes to every media outlet and to all writers and artists in the field about the situation and how where they are after all these years after having created the character. And of course, Neil Adams and Jerry Robinson and people like Kurt Vonnegut and other people come, yeah, you got it. Neil Adams and others come to the rescue, and they start a publicity campaign at their own, potential detriment, because, that kind of thing could get you drummed out of the field. So to cut to the chase, they finally settle with Siegel and Schuster, and they now get a pension of $20,000 a year for life, plus 10 years later. And they also get credited from now on of everything Superman. And the announcement is made at the 1976 Phil Suling convention. So DC, the president of DC is Saul Harrison. He goes into the archives, and they've got only one piece of authentic Siegel and Schuster art that they find. And it's the piece that was supposed to be the splash of Superman #2. Because those vignettes, if you look at them, are the stories in Superman #2. But they were putting out all of these other products like scrapbooks and photo books, and decided to use it for the cover of a scrapbook. So here's the photograph of,
there you go. Sorry.
of Saul Harrison, president of DC, presenting to Siegel and Schuster. And the guy on the far left is the legendary Phil Suling, who basically didn't do the first convention in New York, but then was the king of conventions and, of course, of the direct market, of presenting that page to, Siegel and Schuster. So the story is, as soon as the show is over, Phil says to them, "Hey, do you want to sell that page?" And they said, "How much?" And they agree they sign it, and he buys it. And I end up getting that page. So that's a fun page.
That's a fantastic page. And it's great to have that photograph of them holding it up when they got it back as well. I mean, that's a great backstory.
Yeah, and people don't know, if they don't know the story, that's another day. Phil Suling starting the direct market, which basically saved, in my opinion, comics and has led to all of the stores and everything like that. And one of the saddest days we ever remember, we were living in an apartment in the, I don't remember what year it was, but it was early 80s.
Yeah, mid 80s.
And the doorbell rings in the middle of the night. And so who is this? And it says, it's Phil, Joe, it's Phil Suling. And I said, "Phil, what are you doing here?" He says, "Joe, you got to let me up." So he comes upstairs and he goes, "Listen, I'm sorry. I went to a doctor. I was waiting for the final test, but I've got what's called Lou Gehrig's disease, and they've only given me a few months to live." He says, "You always ask me if I ever sold my collection that you'd like to buy it. Do you want to buy my books right now?" I was in shock, but yes. And then so I bought Phil Suling's comic book collection at that point.
He was a wonderful man.
He was nice. He was great to us.
Yeah, he was great to us. Our kids.
Well, I mean, we wouldn't. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Suling really did save comics, and he really helped start fandom at the end of the day, right? I mean, with his early Suling cons. I mean, I think that a lot of creators owe him a great debt, and just to establish their popularity and to keep comics going. So it like Mel just said, a very sad story. But again, without him, I mean, who knows where whether there even would be a hobby today, because things were kind of down and out there in the at the time period when he was a big advocate for comics and putting the effort out to do cons. I mean, it's not like there was a lot of money in cons. I've owned a con myself, and you don't walk away with anything from doing things like that. So it's kind of a thankless position to be in, and you really have to love what you're doing. And clearly he did. And you're right. We owe him a great debt.
It's like people don't realize that comics were in a dire straits in the 70s. Again, it's that 11-year rule. So 1961 by 70, 72, man, superheroes were down too. That's why people don't realize, why did the Bernie Wrightsons come in and the
I was just going to mention that.
and all of the other. They always, whenever superheroes went out of vogue, they had to try other genres. So whether it be, horror, crime, vampire, well, you name it, they tried everything at that point, both at DC and Marvel. And that lasted until the early 80s, when we had the boom with everybody thinks, the new X-Men came out in 74, everything went crazy. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. It wasn't until the early 80s that everything went crazy.
Yeah, Marcus mentions Conan. I was going to say the same thing with with Barry Windsor Smith and Wrightson, Kaluta. The studio, exactly.
Yeah, if it wasn't that Star Wars came out at the end of the 70s, Jim Shooter will tell anybody that will listen that's what saved Marvel Comics.
I'm going to have to get Jim Shooter on now.
He's a good interview, but beware the 7-hour mark.
Yeah, we'll set a limit on conversations with Jim.
And by the way, Jim Shooter has the memory that everybody wishes that Stan Lee had. Jim Shooter remembers everything.
Well, then I definitely got to get him on. I don't have his contact information, but I'll find it. Well, actually, I know how to get in touch with him. I know somebody who's friends with him. So yeah, I'll work that out. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
So let's see. There's got some more artwork here, and it may be out of the order that you wanted. Well, you know what? Since you mentioned the Star Wars, why don't we go ahead and take a look at this piece here?
Yeah, this one I have a soft spot because this was Carmine Infantino's first Star Wars cover. And as I said, Star Wars became an extremely important product for Marvel at the time. One of the big, I don't want to call it a mystery because I know Howie Chaykin a bit, but Chaykin did the first 10, 12, 11, 10 issues, and he left, and I think that the reason was it was before residuals, and before Scott Wingo.
Do you know
Scott? You've got some of my money there, Scott.
No, he knows our son-in-law.
He knows my son-in-law.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
No, Scott's a good friend. Yeah, he's got an amazing art collection too.
Yeah, wonderful.
Anyway, now they need to go out and get a new artist. Now, the story that I got from Carmine, who was a friend, of course, was that Carmine said that Stan pursued him and remembered him because he needed somebody that could do science fiction, and Stan remembered Adam Strange and Carmine's great work on Adam Strange and everything like that, and pursued him. Now, remember, Carmine in 1976, because of the market imploding and because of the wars with Marvel and each one vying for space at the newsstands, Marvel started to flood the market with new product, trying to get the newsstand space. And then Carmine makes the decision to try and match him book for book. Well, that didn't go over well with the powers that be at DC, and he was terminated. So you could imagine that he was pretty chagrined to go to work for his biggest competitor back then, but he did. And he started with issue 11, but only did the interiors, and this is issue first cover.
Wow, that's amazing. But yeah, I know Howard wasn't. He doesn't like to talk about the Chaykin's early work on Star Wars too often. But no, this was a great. And like you say, I wasn't aware that Jim felt that this was something that helped really save Marvel, but it sort of makes sense because this Star Wars was such a popular film, and then as a comic, I mean that it does. I guess when you start thinking about licensing product, that this was one of the early super success stories, I guess, right?
Well, it was even. It's almost like the story of Popeye beginning in a comic strip first and then becoming a cartoon. Mm-hmm. But Star Wars, George Lucas was trying to get Marvel to do Star Wars prior to a comic book, prior to the movie, and they turned it down. But then Roy Thomas went to a San Diego convention, and Lucas had put together a whole presentation with stills and everything else, and gotten Shaken to do a promotional poster that they sold and gave away at that San Diego. When Roy saw all of this and the enthusiasm, he came back and like worked like crazy to get Marvel to buy the product. Same way he did with Conan. And there's an interesting story there too, by the way. The same guy, Ed Summers, was George Lucas's partner, and he owned Super Snipe, the store in the city, and Lucas was a partner in the in Super Snipe in a portion of it.
That's right.
And they had gone to film school together. So that's why it's Ed Summers that's the executive producer and part writer on the first Conan film. But anyway, Summers has a disagreement with, Lucas is going to do the film in California, so he has nothing to do with Star Wars, which made him bitter forever. But, and poor Ed, a friend, he passed away as well.
Right. I mean, and he was an important figure early on as well. I mean, with Super Snipe, I mean, that's one of the most talked about, bookstores, during that time period. And he had he did start a comic art gallery. I don't know I don't know the time period for how long that was in existence. I know it was the early 70s as well.
It was about, I would say 3 years, 4 years.
I would say 2 to 3 years. Yeah.
And Lucas was partners in the gallery.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
Yeah. So, but anyway, they did launch the comic before the film came out. Shaken never saw the film prior to doing the comic. And that's what he says, is he had no idea this was going to be such a big deal. He had no idea what the film was going to be like. As far as he was concerned, this was a ripoff of Cody Starbuck and many different things that he had seen in his career in science fiction. So he always says, if I would have known, I would have done a better job. If I would have known, I would have done this. So, that's the story there. But the comic book preceded it. So then once the movie came out, it went crazy. And that's why Marvel repackaged it. They reprinted #1. They did the Marvel Treasury. They did all different formats. They bled it for everything. I think the sales... You're talking about a time where sales had gone down into the hundreds of thousands. Star Wars did 1 million copies.
That's just incredible for the time. Yeah.
And also at 30 cents, which was one of the first more expensive books.
I hate to say I didn't buy it when it first came out. I started picking it up after the first year. I was a late bloomer to Star Wars, unfortunately, even though that was right when I was a kid. I did see the film when it came out, but it didn't. I didn't feel like I wanted to read it in a comic until probably around issue 20 or so. So I guess I kind of regret
getting married, so we were a little busy at the time.
Well, but that's a great piece, and a wonderful piece to have in your collection too. I mean, that's a beauty. I don't have any Infantino in my collection, but he's on my short list of artists that I want to get something from. So I think
I have 2,000 pages of Infantino.
Don't say that.
Oh.
Well, that's great. That's again, that's why I knew you guys were going to be great guests to have on tonight, because you'll make us all salivate to know more about your collection, and so this is a good starting point for us. We actually did cross the hour mark, but I want to show a few more pieces before we call it a night. I know that everybody's who's tuned in tonight is really enjoying this our chat, but let's see here. I was recently at the Marvel exhibit in Columbus, so seeing this piece here is it's just amazing to see this. I love it. And what's the backstory on this piece?
Well, that's a bit of a longer story, but as I said, in the 70s, I actually dealt with Harvey Comics as on a professional level. One day I get a phone call from their art director, and he says, "Joe, you got to come in here. The brothers are fighting with one another. They're tearing down the building. They're taking stuff out of the warehouse. They're leaving it on the dock. Joe, you gotta get in the middle of this. You gotta save that stuff. We'll never be able to reprint anything again." And he was in this panic. So I go up there, and sure enough, They are dismantling the building. There's stuff everywhere, and the backstory there is that the brothers, Alfred Harvey had gotten hit in the head with a brick walking through Central Park. He was in a coma. His brother had passed away, and there was and the other members of the family, let me put it politely, didn't get along with one another. So next thing you know, all of this stuff is brought to a storage facility, and they asked me to go in and do an appraisal of it. So I'll just jump ahead, and Harvey, it turns out, kept everything that they had ever done, from the superhero days, from everything. So I'm negotiating to buy the comics and the art, but I had no idea how much art they had. What I really didn't know is that Alfred Harvey was very shrewd. They were publishing a like Terry and the Pirates, the reprints, and Dick Tracy. Well, they had insisted that the syndicate send them the originals. So they had every single Terry and the Pirate from number one. They had almost every Dick Tracy after 1930, I want to say 39, because everything before that had been printed by Dell and other publishers. So a very famous and well-known collector was a guy named Harry Matetsky. He knew about that because he knew Joe Simon back in the day, and Joe had always gone up to the Harvey warehouse. Anyway, making a long story short, I ended up getting all of the Alex Schomburg covers that were there, a lot of the speed art, a lot of the Joe Kubert Black Cat, and I kept, this was my favorite speed cover of all of them, because it's the Black Cat, of course, and Captain Freedom, who's a ripoff of Captain America and Captain Freedom and all the rest. And this has got everything that you want in an Alex Schomburg cover, including the Black Cat being dropped down into a vat of
acid.
Yeah.
No, this is amazing. And then, that sounds like a whole story unto itself. I mean, that's what I see, and that's why we know we're going to have future shows, because there are so many. A long story,
yeah.
But that's amazing that they were. Why weren't like stats sent versus? I mean, he specifically requested, I need all the originals if I'm going to reproduce them, and that's the best way to go about it. Wow.
Because he said they needed to be, and he, he just wanted them. I mean, he wanted. I mean, listen, he also had Joe Palookas and other things that were less valuable, but yeah. I mean, I have the cover of Joe Palooka #1. I have the cover of Sad Sack #1. I have some of the earliest, because I liked those when I was young.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'd love to see your collection sometime. But let's see. Here's I love this as well. I mean, what a really great piece of history here. A nice ad piece, but boy, I'd be, this is incredible.
That is the original art for the window poster display of when Captain America 1 came out. This is with issue #2. And it's by an artist named Ed Hamilton. It's signed. And I also have the sister piece to this for Marvel Mystery that has the Submariner and the Human Torch and the other characters on. And then I also have, it might be in my CAF gallery, but I have the original model sheet for Captain America done by Simon and Kirby.
Oh, and you didn't send that one for us to see tonight?
You have it. It's in the CAF gallery.
It's in the CAF. I forgot to actually grab the link to that, but that's I'll find it before the end of the show and put it in the chat. But yeah, that's incredible. That's again, it's hard. It's just hard to imagine that those works are still out there. But before we look at another piece of art, Mikhail actually had an interesting question. It said, what did your friends say over the years as they observed you guys grow in this untraditional field?
Some Snickers.
Yeah, I'll bet. I don't know. I never cared. To be honest with you, I never cared.
He enjoyed himself, and he still is. So it's not a problem. We just keep on doing what we do. It wasn't, it wasn't flattering, but there's Joe. He collects funny books or something like that. But that's fine. Whatever.
But as Michael Houston likes to say, in the end, we won.
All the geeks.
The geeks won. So there's nothing to be ashamed of,
Nope, I completely agree. And Wes was curious how many pieces you think you might have in your original art collection.
Is that Wes Stephan?
Yeah, that's correct, Wes Stephan. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, Wes, how are you?
More than one.
More than one.
By the way, you talk about you'd like to come. There's only been a handful of people that I ever let come up and see some of my stuff, and it's not all in one place, but everybody I've ever let come up ends up collecting other stuff, like Albert, Mike Finn. I heard Mike Finn other thing. Mike Finn never had a piece of Golden Age art. He comes up, what's that? What's next thing you know, he's Mr. Golden Age. He is Mr.
He competitor. Is. Well, I think you're Mr. Golden Age and Mrs. Golden Age, but Michael is a close second. But
he's a monster.
It's true. I mean, if anything comes up on the market, he gets it. I mean, all the dealers know if they get a piece in, they just contact Michael, right? Because he's
the ultimate. He researches every piece, and the more obscure, the better.
Yeah. Yeah, he really loves it. He researches it. He puts everything into context. And
he's a great guy. He's helped us out. He's a wonderful friend, and we're going to be getting together in a couple of weeks again.
Yeah. Post-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, we're finally to that stage where we can sort of say that, right? With cons coming back and everything.
We're planning it. Yeah, at least we're planning it. Let's see what happens.
Right. Well, the summer's just around the corner, so you never know. Rupert asked, ever thought of uploading a high-res gallery museum, like having your own virtual museum? I mean, I guess that your CAF is sort of like that. I mean, and I did just link to your CAF so everybody could check it out. If
I only have a handful of items on there, but no, I never really had a desire to do that. I mean, listen, I always approached this never as a business. The reason I did this is because I wanted to do it as a collector. The reason I didn't really ever want to become, I did my other job as an executive in that other company for 30 years, is that when your hobby becomes your job, I was always worried that I was going to lose some of the luster, and that was my gear shift to shift down out of what I was doing in everyday life.
Stress.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. I mean, I always tell people I want to be remembered, or I feel I'm a collector first rather than the owner of CAF and all those things, because I feel like if I didn't feel I was a collector, it would be a whole lot less fun. I mean, I'm fortunate to be doing what I do, but I'm a collector at heart. I mean, that's why I got started. It's why, it's really the thing that continues to keep me enthusiastic about the hobby, is discovering new artworks or adding pieces to my collection. That's far more important than the things I do on CAF. Well, although that's equally as important, but that's where I want to be. And I you guys are the same way. I mean, and I think that a lot of people turn these things, their hobbies into businesses, because it does help them kind of, stay involved with the hobby in different ways. Right. And it also helps you to, because of whom you were and the things you were doing, the fact that you were able to be known for being able to praise collections and those sorts of things. I mean, that helped grow your collection at the same time, and you can't own it all, but it got your foot in the door. I mean, I think that anybody who's been savvy in the hobby, whether they've been in it for 5 years or they've been in it for 35 years, I mean, those are the things you kind of have to do. You got to be able to put yourself out there and to have the ability to even find out about those kind of opportunities.
Yeah. So. And not only that, but you have to keep everything in perspective. I tell people, you can't let your collection define you. You can't let your passion, only define you. There's a real world, and there's family, and you got to keep it in balance. People ask me, I parted with a lot of great things. Like, I sold Jim Halperin, the only known page from Marvel Mystery 1.
I just saw that. I saw that this this weekend. Isn't that the page that's in the traveling exhibit right now? The Submariner page?
Yeah, that's the page.
Yeah.
And the only Schomburg timely cover, the cover of Human Torch 16, and the cover of Submariner 1, the Silver Age, the John Buscema cover, the cover of Action 50.
Amazing.
But those 4 pieces, when my kids got married, I gave them half each, and they bought an apartment each in Manhattan, which then led to a house, which then led to careers and bigger house and grandkids and everything else. So I have no regrets about it. I mean, one of the good things about working with Heritage is I used to take something out of my collection each auction or at a big show to see the auction or the show and part with something that I really didn't want to, but I kind of needed to do that. Now I don't have to do any of that.
That's a good position to be in. Well, the kids already have their apartments. They don't need to sell anything now. So nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. No. I mean, I sold Jim Halpern his Uncle Scrooge #1 in 1983. One of his first ever Golden Age books.
Yeah, and we just found out he sold it because it wasn't high grade enough.
Yeah, he found a better. It was a
he found a better one.
Yeah, he found a better one.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I hope one day to get Jim on the show. I've told he's a bit camera shy, but I figure if I get a few other people to come on with him, we'll coax him to be on one evening. That would be a fun.
Well, if he sees this, he might agree to do it.
It's pretty.
Well, I'll keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah.
He would always have an open invitation.
Yeah, he encourages us to do it, so why not?
Right. No, well, I was glad he volunteered you guys to be on the show with me when we did the best of.
He did.
Well, let's see. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I'd like to look at. Let's see. What other pieces did you send me? Let's see here. Well, this I like the this piece by Barks. I mean, this just kind of goes back to your original. I would assume.
Absolutely.
The thing that really got you started and comics and then art collecting was Disney. So this is a beauty.
This has got a great story to it. Another good story. A guy. So I live in New Jersey, and there is a guy who's a picker. Everybody knows what that is. Goes to open houses and stuff like that. He lives in the next town. Well, he would occasionally find paintings and illustrations and stuff like that, and he'd call us up and he'd ask us if we were interested. I was his main guy to buy that stuff from him. Well, he never thought that we collected comic art. He went into a house in the next town over from me. So here he is, lives one town over from me, and then he goes into the next town in a different way. And it turns out that the guy worked at the Poughkeepsie factory where they printed all the Dell comic books for all those years, going back to the 30s. And he would bring home comic book pages, especially covers, because they looked just like a coloring book page for his young kids. And his young kids would draw on them. And so this guy goes into the basement, and pinned up on the different walls all over are these scribbled in pages. And the guy goes, "Do you have any of those left that don't have any scribbles on them?" And the guy points to a box, and it's a box of covers. He takes 5 or 6 of the covers, and he shows up at a convention in New York. And I won't mention names, but he walks up to a dealer who's next to another dealer. And next thing you know, they're looking and they see these, a Disney Comics and Stories cover, Donald Duck covers, Mickey Mouse covers, Walt Kelly covers. None of this had ever been found on the market. There's no known 4-color comic Donald Duck Barks cover in existence. So they end up going partners on the deal. I won't get into the details. To make a long story short, Steve Jeppy ends up getting this cover, even though I was promised it and agreed to buy it. But Jeppy goes one bid higher, not on an auction, but just whatever. And he ends up getting it. And because Barks was going to have his 95th anniversary, Steve asked Barks to color the original cover. And Barks refused to do it in watercolor because he said that it would bleed and would look garish. So he used oil pencils like pastels, which he thought would be better. So it's signed and it says colored by Carl Barks. Now, this is the only Carl Barks original Donald Duck cover in existence, A Christmas for Shacktown. But I also have like the earliest comics and stories cover by Walt Kelly, which is, I'm looking over here, it's 4-color 43. I have a second Walt Kelly cover and tons of other good stuff. I have my share.
You certainly do. Well, that's an amazing story because I just pointed out Jeffrey, an artist in his own right, said that didn't look like it, that it was colored by kids. So it's colored by Carl Barks.
No,
not by kids.
Amazing.
I mean, I wouldn't have had him do that. I'm a big fan, of course, of
right.
and white art, but what am I going to do?
That's what it is. You got to take it as it is. I mean, we've got a lot of Pat Olaf colored, Marvel artwork out there, right? That if you want that page and it's colored, that's the way you've got to take it. So
exactly.
I agree. See, we got a few other pieces to look at, but I'm not sure if you guys are ready to sign off or not. What do you think? You got a couple more minutes?
If you want us to continue, go ahead.
All right. I got three more pieces here.
Great.
And they're very different pieces too. So let's see. I'll go with the one of the older ones first. A piece of crazy cat artwork. This one's the great story, great gag on this one too. So this is a beautiful page.
Yeah. Well, can you read what it says in the corner? The inscription.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wait a minute. I've got to look at the original now. If I can't make it out. I can see it's to Al, but I can't.
Al Taliaferro is the guy who created the Donald Duck strip and drew it for all those years.
Oh, wow.
George Harriman, Al Taliaferro, of course, was in California, comes out to New York on his only trip to New York to one of the cartoonists' functions, and meets George Harriman, and Harriman gives him one of his better pages and erases his signature and reinscribes it to my friend Al Taliaferro, George Harriman. And this was owned by Al Taliaferro's family, and that's where I bought it, and I've owned it ever since.
Wow, it's a beauty. And that makes me think about back in the day and even into the 70s. I mean, cartoonists really, they were their own. I don't want to say they were a clique, but they got together. They commiserated on things and talked about their craft. And I'm sure they talked a lot about the state of the industry and rates and things like that. But it's a different world today than it was back then. But strip artists, really made a point of getting together. And so there's, I've seen some things like over Berkey lives nearby, and so I've seen a lot of those like get-togethers where the strip artists would just do fun illustrations and those sorts of things. And so I think it's great. I think it was a really interesting time. So to have George gift that to Al, I'm sure that sort of thing probably happened quite a bit.
No, it happened. As a matter of fact, some of the greatest examples that are known to exist are that other artists, I hate to say lesser artists, but it's a guy who worked on something, an editorial cartoon for a short period of time, but he went to the National Cartoonist Society meetings, which were held every year, and they would bring art to give to other people, and all you had to do was ask. So Hal Foster would give away great examples.
Can you imagine?
Would give away
I can't even imagine that.
Yeah.
But it's great that they were doing that. I mean, I have not read a lot about it. I just knew that there was something that they did regularly.
Oh yeah.
But I think that's but again, these are the things that make our hobby interesting, to understand why these pieces still exist and how they got there, and then the provenance behind them. So, I mean, you're really fortunate to pick up that piece. I mean, Harriman was an interesting character, you know, in and of himself. But and I've got several collected books of Harriman's work. I mean, I really have a deep appreciation for his contribution to the medium. I think a lot of people look to his work and, you know, for inspiration. I mean, it was whether or not they really understood the stories, his approach to his page layouts. I mean, his compositions, all those things. I mean, he was incredible, way before his time.
Well, listen, you know, as you get into this hobby, like I said in the beginning, the fun part of it is going backward and discovering the influencers. So, for instance, you know, if I point to Golden Age of Comics, I'll have a conversation with somebody and I'll say, you know, who are the most influential Golden Age artists? And, you know, to me, it's like Will Eisner, Lou Fine, Jack Kirby, and like Reed Crandall, because everybody admired his anatomy. Mm-hmm. And those were the influential Golden Age artists. You go to the Atomic Age, which is, you know, the EC era and things like that. And of course you got Frazetta and Wally Wood and Al Williamson and those kind of guys. You go to the Silver Age and you can pick out those guys. You go to the Bronze Age and you got Neil Adams and Steranko and you know, I could go on with each one of the ages. And the same thing is true in comic strips, because that's what every comic book artist aspired to be, because that's where the money was. That's where the notoriety was. So who were the most influential, you know, comic strip guys? So you have Winsor McKay, you have George Harriman, you have Hal Foster, you have Alex Raymond and Milton Caniff. And, you know, there wasn't a Golden Age artist that didn't point to like Milton Caniff and his ability to spot blacks and all of that didn't influence comic books. So, you know, how could you be a huge fan of this and not want an example of that, you know? And, you know, those that love Calvin and Hobbes, what do you think Watterson loved? I mean, he loved Crazy Cat. You know, listen, we can get into a highbrow conversation about Harriman, which I sometimes it goes a little too far. You know, the Gilbert Seldes, this is one of the greatest American art forms ever created and one of the most important things ever created in America. And all of that kind of stuff. But, you know, okay, I get it. I like it.
Well, Mel picked out several of the artists that you did as well, with McKay and Raymond Foster and Caniff, certainly. I mean, I love Caniff's work. I mean, I've never owned a piece of it again either, but that one's going to get corrected. I think, you know, Mike's holding a piece for me. Finally, I found a piece that I like, and I'm going to correct it. Yeah, I've always wanted a piece of his strip art, as, you know, an earlier piece. So I finally got something on the way. But
as I said with the Harvey Warehouse, at one point I owned 1,000 examples.
Crazy.
And the guy who's become the biggest Caniff collector was Bobby Murphy, who we're having an auction at Heritage, and it's this month,
March 10th.
And I sold him at least 200 Caniffs. He loved, great example, had a great eye. So if you're looking, I mean, they're there right now.
That's one to look. All right, you know, I knew it was on my calendar as well to kind of use it to do some PR for it, but I'll definitely check out. I haven't looked at it yet.
You know, Winsor McKay. I mean, the guy was a genius. You think of what he did starting in 1904 and his use of you know, a line that varied depending on trying to get depth and understanding how color was going to be applied and all the rest. I mean, we're privileged. We represented the McKay estate for 30 years.
My goodness. I can't even imagine how interesting that would be.
I mean, I might have a picture of it, but I have one of the only hand-colored and probably the best Winsor McKay hand-colored piece. I think I sent that to you. I'm not sure.
I don't know if that one was sent to me or not. Oh, you know what it was? Actually, I think that might have been one that I didn't get a chance to make a slide out of. No. I'm going to kick myself for that one.
Well, I'll kick
it. Well, that's why we're going to have a part 2 for sure. But hey, before we get on to look at the last two pieces, I did want to thank Brian Ketterer for joining the channel. I really appreciate it, Brian. It means a lot that people are having fun and enjoy these shows that we do. So let's see, we got two more pieces to look at, and not the Winsor McCay, unfortunately. But this. I was surprised to see this one in the sets that you gave me. I mean, it's a really great Tarzan piece.
Another story. I mean, I all of these have. I don't think every piece of art I have is like this, but I purposely pick things that I have fond memories, and I thought would be enjoyable stories. So of course this is Tarzan as done by Bern Hogarth, who we got to know and became a friend, and there's a whole segment to be discussed. Bern Hogarth, the founder of the School of Visual Arts, and some of the greatest books on anatomy and drawing and all the rest. And of course, he was the second Tarzan artist after Hal Foster. So anyway, I'm out in California, and he lives in Tarzana, California. And while I'm there, I'm visiting with him, and I tell him that I'm going to be going the next day to have dinner with Danton Burroughs, who is running the Burroughs estate, of thing. And I said, you must know him. He says, I will not talk to them. I haven't had anything to do with them for 20 years. I hate them. He goes on and on. I says, what? How could that be?
Right.
And he goes, oh, it all goes back. I did a Jungle Tales of Tarzan, this book that I really put a lot of effort in, and I hand colored every page. And after I finished it, I asked to have some of the originals back. And Danton's father, who was running the Burroughs estate at the time, said, absolutely not. We keep all the originals. So I told him, if that's the case, don't ever speak to me again. So.
And that was what happened.
So
My
I'm
goodness.
Like, what? I said, okay. So then the next day I go and I have dinner with Burroughs, and I tell him what Hogarth said. And I said, listen, you must be aware of this, right? He goes, are you kidding? I love Bern's work. I love Hogarth. Is that the reason he won't talk to us? I said, yeah.
Yeah.
So he goes, listen, Joe, do me a favor. Pick up the phone and call Bern. So I pick up the phone, and he says, tell Bern I will give him 2 pages of each one from that book if he would be willing to hand color one of my Hogarth originals, because he had like 12 of them. So Bern says, you mean I have to color your original and you'll give me 2 pages of that art? Yes. And they agreed, and we made a deal. And the next time I went out to California, we made the exchange. We got together. We all had dinner together. And that's why I bought that page from Danton. And it says up there, it's inscribed to Danton from Bern Hogarth. So this is drawn by Bern, owned by Edgar Rice Burroughs' estate, Danton Burrough, and then hand colored by Bern, and bought by me.
Dated 1994, actually.
Yeah, that's when all that stuff happened. Yeah. And then
Wow.
I can give you another quickie. I'm with Bern because it's 1994, and I say, hey, Bern, we're doing Christie's, and wouldn't you love to have your art represented? And he says, yeah, sure. Let me, can you go through? And he had a pile of Tarzan. So he said, how much is this worth? I said, $7,000. How much is that worth? That's not enough. That's not enough. That's not enough. That's not enough. That's not. And I said, well, what do you think that they're worth? He goes, I wouldn't sell it for less than 10,000. I said, well, to be worth 10,000, it'd have to be hand colored. He had given me for years a lecture about the only art that mattered is black and white art. Color is a fallacy. Color is unnecessary. It's that he lived for black and white art. And he goes, so you're saying if I color this, I could get $10,000? I said, yeah. He says, okay, I'll color it. Just like that.
That's all you had to say.
That was it.
That's funny. And I agree, with Lori here as well. I mean, his dynamic figure drawings were kind of what every aspiring comic artist, looked at as reference back in the at least late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, I owned probably 3 or 4 of his books when I was in high school.
Dynamic anatomy. Yeah.
Yeah.
The man was a maniac. I mean, the first time I'm literally meeting him for the first time, it was like early on. And I walk into his apartment and he goes, before you take another step, do you know art? I said, I don't know. I know. Well, in what regards? How many human heads make up a human body? I said, what? When you're drawing, it's supposed to be you scale it to the number of heads. And I said, 7. You see, you're so misguided. That's what people think. Not when you're dealing with when you're dealing with athletes, when you think dealing with people who are gifted, who's specimens. He says it's 8 heads. And then he takes out these pages and he's showing me how he draws these things. And, I mean, he would argue with you about, the color of black. I mean, it was very funny.
No, but he's a legend for all that. I mean, I think, and I still think he's kind of underappreciated in his own way. I mean, I've heard some people weren't fond of his anatomy drawing books, but I mean, I grew up on him, so I mean, he's always been.
If you look at Bern Argoth, you're looking at Gil Kane, 20 years earlier.
Sure.
I mean, that's why Gil's artwork was so unique in comics. I mean, he used more of V's and instead of the circular form. And that's why, and was more focused on anatomy the same way Hogarth was.
Well, Mr. Easy Go Lucky actually said I had Hogarth as an instructor at Art Center College of Design.
I'm sorry.
So he probably heard a lot of the same things that you did.
But Byrne was good in one regard, and I'm sure that person will attest to it. He felt that, everybody thought that if you're going to go to art school, you had to become a primary artist. And he would say, no. You know how many other people are in the field of printing and art and everything else that that people don't know, the strippers, the colorists, and that's why the school was focused on the whole range of abilities so that people could work in a field that they loved. So that I appreciated.
Yeah. And we got to know his 2 boys. And unfortunately, one of them passed, but he raised fine men also. Yeah. So that was good.
Well, I'm envious. Everybody, you both got to meet him and know him. So it's like you said, there's plenty of other stories there as well. We know we're having you guys back. But so the last artwork I have is just so different than all the other ones. So let me pull this one up here.
Oh, well, see, I didn't want people to think like there are those that think that, we're dinosaurs. And no, I have literally, I won't say how many, but a lot of, Bronze Age and modern art. And here's a page from Giant Size X-Men 1 from, Dave Cockrum, of course. And he was another, a dear guy. And he was a great guy. An avid fan. He died way too young. And I'll give you a quick story on this page. I actually owned probably half of the first chapter, or of Giant Size X-Men 1, several pages. Still have a few, but when we were doing I heard Mike Berkey talk about the 1990. He called it the 1996 Christie's Marvel auction, where he met John Romita. It was actually in 1995.
That's right.
And we had a
he's gonna hate that you corrected him. He's like an elephant. He literally, he seems to extract dates out of thin air whenever I'm talking to him. But
that's so what I find. Well, I mean, I happen to know that's true because we have the catalog.
Right, of course.
And the auction was not November of '95, and so we had no, not that was the Spiderman.
Yeah, but we also had wasn't.
Oh, there was two auctions that year,
that's
right? So, matter of fact, I mean, I don't think Mike will mind. I'm thinking about it, but I remember Mike. I get a call that there was everybody wanted to go to these Christie's previews, and we were going to have Stanley and all of the Marvel artists that he worked with, be there, and John Romita was going to be there. So I get a call from Mike and Albert later, and he said, "Joe, I got to get to that. I got to get into that party. You got to get me a ticket to that party." I said, Mike, it's sold out. No, Joe, you don't understand. I got to get there. And it was like, it was very pressing. So I ended up getting him the thing, but he had called so many people that it got back to John Romita, and he hadn't met John Romita. And John Romita calls me up and says, "Joe, I heard that there's this guy that's really, kind of over the top fan, and is he going to be at the party?" And I said, "Yeah, John."
John was a little worried, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was a little worried. And so I promised him that I would. I said, "He's a good guy. Don't worry. I know him. Don't worry. I'll be there. And everything else." And that picture, that image that Mike has on his website of, the Spider-Man in the costume and him with John, I think, and Stan.
Yeah, John and Joe. Yeah, Stan and Sinna was with him. Yeah.
That's me taking that picture. He asked me to take the picture while I was there. So I had my
seriously?
camera. Yes, that's my picture that I sent him.
Well, you know what? I actually, because he had like 3 of them that he had blown up, and I've got one that's signed by everyone as well. He was like, "Here, I don't even know." Like 4 years ago, he said, "I want you to have this," and so he gave it to me. So it was taken by you. I never knew that.
Yeah,
I'm going to put it on my wall now.
I was at my son's house just this weekend. We were at, and our grandkids were asking us, and I said we were going to be on this, and they said, "Why?" And I said, "They, what do they know?" So I said, "Well, didn't Daddy ever tell you that he knows all the people and he knew Spider-Man?" And they said, "No, he didn't. No, he didn't." So I go on the internet, and if you just do Joe Mannarino or Peter Mannarino as a search on the internet, you'll see a photograph of Peter, my son, me, Stan Lee, and Spider-Man, dressed as Spider-Man, looking down. That was picked up by the Associated Press and literally went all over the world. And that was the set just before I took the picture of Mike in that same exact position. So you see, I threw Albert under the bus. Now I threw Mike. Next, I'm going to get to Will Gabriel, Brunswick, Catratis.
Everybody has to watch out.
I've got the dirt on all of them. All of them.
I'll see. I'm trying to find it. Is this a photo where Spider-Man's like on a desk? Is that
Yes.
Yeah. That's it.
Here, let's see. Let me swing things around here. Maybe I can share my screen and see if it's the right one. Let's see here. Is it that one? This one here?
Yep, that's it.
That's it.
And that's my son, and that's me, and that's Stan Lee, and yeah. So the story on that thing. So again, I'll throw Albert under the bus. So we're and listen, I'm not going to.
If only Albert were here.
Yeah, I know, it's great. But he'll watch this. So the story behind that auction, and there's a lot. I'll save that. We'll save that for another day. The Christies. Mm-hmm. But that was a very important auction because of that auction, I got releases from Marvel, and then because I got it from Marvel from DC, for every artist, if they ever wanted to do recreations, and they never had to worry about the publishers going after them. Mm-hmm. That was the agreement that I made in order to do that auction. So because I wanted nothing to do with those animation cells, we did not want it, but we got them to do all the recreations. The artist made 100% of the money. So we reached out to the artist and said, if you want to consign something, that would be great. But if you want to do a recreation, you'll get 100% of the money. So, guys were getting $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 for recreations, which unheard of, and they got 100% of the money. Well, Cockrum needed additional money, and he had these pages along with other early X-Men pages. So I have the pages here. Now, Albert will be the first one to tell you there was nobody more tenacious about calling me up constantly. Joe, did you pick anything up? Joe, can I come over your house? Joe, can I come over your house? Because Albert knew I did not really care much about undersized art as much as I do oversized, and I would be willing to part with that inexpensively. So Neil Adams art and all sorts of stuff Albert got for me.
Which Albert is very passionate about, Neil's.
Very much so. Yeah.
All sorts of stuff. So anyway, he comes over and he says, what's that? Is that Dave Cockrum? I said, yeah. He says, you're not going to put that in the auction, are you? I said, of course. He says, Joe, you're going to be laughed out of nobody likes. He says, that guy is reviled in the industry. He says, you're not going to get $50 a page. So I said, are you kidding me? I said, the new X-Men? I said, you got to be kidding. I said, no, I'm going to do it anyway. We put him in, and we put a reserve of, I want to say, $300 a page.
Very minimal reserve.
Minimal, like nothing. They passed.
Of course.
In 1995, they passed. So after I felt so bad, and Dave's wife was sick, I said, Dave, I feel terrible about this. How much do you want for these? And whatever the reserve was, I gave him double and bought those pages.
Well, that's good. So, I mean, Dave was such a good guy.
He was really a great guy. Years later, Albert, you still have those Dave Cockrum pages, those X-Men pages? And I said, yeah. He says, well, you know, I'm willing to take them off your hand. I said, really? I said, I tell you what. And at the time, whatever it was, say it was worth $5,000. I said, because you laughed and made fun and didn't buy it, but he was sitting there in the auction. I said, it's going to be double. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's how this hobby goes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's I had never heard that story, so that's a good one.
I'm sure Albert will pipe in.
Yes, he will. We might. Well, he'll want to be on the show to rebut some things.
To rebut all this, yes.
John Buscema. John Romita is good story with John about that. Was he said, Joe, what cover do you want me to do? I said, you do any cover you want. I said, what do you think your best cover is? He said, what do you think? I said, well, you know, your first cover was 39. He said, yeah, but the Goblin's not wearing a mask. He says, I'd rather do 40. I said, okay, well, you're the artist.
You can argue.
So he said, do you mind? I've always wanted to do a painting, but without using an outline. And I said, what do you mean? He says, you know, we always have to do the outline first and then color inside the lines. He says, I'd like to do it as a proper watercolor painting without the outline and do it as a painting. I said, be my guest. And he did.
Beautiful.
That's if you see.
He was an amazing painter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Mike now owns that cover, but he wasn't the winning bidder at the auction, but later made it a mission to go out and get it. And I think I'm not sure, but I think he still owns it.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but he literally has the first piece of John Romita Sr. published work, which is from when he was 19 or maybe 18. It's a watercolor Santa Claus, you know, just a kind of a close-up, like a Coca-Cola kind of Santa Claus.
We saw that on your interview.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, it's so beautiful, and and that was when he was just getting started. I mean, so he really was he is an amazing artist. So, but just seeing those early pieces like that, yeah, that's you wouldn't. The thing is, because we're so used to their pen and ink work, and so you don't really get to see stuff like that, and not a lot of creators have the time to even produce work like that.
Yeah.
So that's good that. See, again, that's why we had the Christie. These auctions need to be kind of talked about probably separately, and then compartmentalized by the artists that were involved, and So, couple questions from the audience before we call it a night, because we're almost at the 2-hour mark. See, we could be. This is like a Jim Shooter interview.
You could imagine if I hadn't told you that we're insisting to keep it to 1.
Let's see. Scott Wingo asked if you had any McFarlane Spidey art.
Yes.
All right. Well, there, that answers that question. There you go, Scott. Now you know, because of course Scott is
Also,
the
I think
Spidey
I
fan.
auctioned. I used to own the cover of Spiderman. Was it 327? That really great Green Goblin cover. So there was an example that I put it in one of our All-Star because he was hot and I needed something and I auctioned it. I always regretted that. That was one of the great pieces that we had. Yeah.
Let's see. Terry Hardcastle was asking if either of you are planning to attend any of the shows in the future. I'm assuming with Heritage in some capacity, or do you have any shows on your schedule at all this year?
Well, we're going to probably go to Joe Vettery's show at I don't know when the next one is, but Joe.
I think it's April 23rd, I believe.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll go to that one, but we'll go to those, and then I don't know. As soon as COVID lists, I mean, listen, we've been doing shows we probably did the third San Diego and never missed one. So we've been doing them for quite a while. It's not like we were never out there.
COVID permitting, we will try.
Exactly.
Yes.
And let's see. I think that was the only other question that we got. Oh, Lori asked about rights in art. Do you have any rights in art? I can't imagine that you don't.
I have a great. Oh yeah,
and
Lori. Yeah,
her
Wigan.
husband,
Yeah, and her husband.
Yeah.
Great collectors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have any rights in art? I sold them a lot of rights in art. Yes. I have one of my favorite Frankenstein plates. It's Frankenstein facing the monster with the rain coming down, and it's one of the great ones.
Wow. Well, that's those are all there. Those are very hard to come by and coveted. So that's
I had no idea.
Amazing piece.
I don't know anything about that.
Well, heck, even the ones that didn't see print or that only were half finished. I mean,
oh yeah,
I mean, that's they are.
We've had two or three examples in Heritage half finished.
Yeah,
right.
I owned quite a few rights and plates at one point, and we were auctioning every Christie's. We would have a rights and Frankenstein plate. Yeah.
See, this is why we're going to have a multi-part interview. But I was looking at the calendar. I think I mentioned it in an email as well that because we had talked about doing upcoming auction previews for Heritage, and I know that the next signature auction is in that first week of April. And I do have Monday, April 4th open. If you wanted to come up, we could keep that one to an hour. We could just talk about the highlights to that signature auction. So I know it's not one of the, as far as the dates go, that's not a full 4-day signature auction like a lot of them, right? I think that might be.
This is a matter of fact, this is going to be the biggest auction ever with the number of items and I mean, just to give you an idea, typical we can get an accounting of the value before an auction. So a typical pre-auction estimate, like when we did $26 million was $12 million, say. And then the bidding goes crazy and it goes way over. This auction is $20 million before the first bid.
So who knows what's going to happen?
This is going to be a monster.
And it's over 1,700 items. So it's going to be a big one.
Oh, it is so funny. When I set that into the schedule about having you on April 4th, which I did over the weekend because I was checking it out, the auction was scheduled as just April 7th and 8th, and now it's the 7th through the 10th. So it has been updated on the.
Yeah, they only mentioned the 2 live events with auctioneers, live auctioneers, and then Saturday and Sunday are no auctioneers, just internet bidding.
And that's without cards in it any longer, without video games in it any longer, without any of those things. So it's become a monster.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be hard to top the last one as far as the comic arts side of the sales, but
that was the Wild West out there.
Hey, who would have imagined? I mean, I don't know.
It's crazy.
I mean, we're the ones that got the Zec page, and there's a story there up to it, but
another day.
Another day.
Yeah.
Another day. Well, so then, okay, so then hopefully on the 4th you'll be free. We can talk about it. Do some
All right,
previews. We
pencil
can
it
kind
in.
of we'll cherry pick some pieces to talk about in advance, and no, and then I'm going to look at my calendar because we're going to have to get you on for a second time. I know some people were saying it's hard to get second interviews with me, but I think we can work it out. We'll try to maybe something in May or early June, but we will have you guys on again.
We appreciate it. Look forward to it.
Same here. So let's see. I'm just making sure we got Marcus asked if you're going to have more Secret Wars 8 pages in the next.
Actually, in our international auction.
We have a really.
I was going to say
international. Did you see
right.
that? There's a
I did, yeah.
252 page. That's
it's
great,
got
right?
Venom in about half the panels or even more.
Right, and I when. Not that this could be a later conversation, but I mean I remember reading the early articles of when you guys chose to work with Heritage that it was noted that they were kind of bringing you on. It said that to kind of get the international auction kind of started. Is that true? Were you kind of part of the group that was to kind of at least move them into that area?
Yeah,
Nadia.
I'm sure there were lots of reasons why they wanted you to work for them, but that one was always noted because they didn't have an international auction until about 3 years ago?
Yeah, we started the whole international initiative, but the interesting story there, going back 2 hours ago, was Nadia and I met in French class, and then go ahead 30 years, and we have an apartment now in Paris. And we ended up getting that from a collector in Paris because we used to do so much sales overseas. We used to travel back and forth because the shipping was, it's always a risk.
Right.
Shipping stuff internationally, especially before. Especially you have to declare the value, and then, that targets the art. So I ended up getting that. I'm there, and the collector will always, be chagrined that I'm going to tell the story, but
he knows who he is.
Yeah, so we're there, and I'm delivering some art, and he goes, "Do you mind if we meet at this other place instead of where we normally meet?" And I said, "No." So he says, I have a small apartment here, and I just it's empty now, and I need to get some information in order to list it. I said, "Really? You own an apartment, and you're going to list it for sale?" He says, "Yeah, I'm going to sell it." I said, "Really? How much is an apartment in Paris?" He goes, "Why? Are you interested?" He said, "I'll trade if you give me stuff from your collection that normally do." So he loved Terry and the Pirates, so I traded him some Terry and the Pirates in cash, and we ended up buying this apartment.
You've gotten a lot of apartments thanks to your collection.
Yes,
whether for you or for your kids.
Yeah, no, it's very fun. We love going there, but we haven't been there in 2.5 years.
So to answer the question, are we going to be at shows? Only after we go to Europe a couple of times.
So we started, meeting up with collectors and picking up art and things like that. And we said, well, you know what? There's a real need for a dedicated international auction, and we searched for the proper person to head it, and he sort of fell into our laps in a New York show, and Olivier, and
he's great,
and he's been wonderful.
He's very passionate. He knows both American and European art. He lives in Belgium. So and we had gotten a foothold because of our connections in Europe. We got the first Hergé cover of Tintin, and $1 million cover and things like that. People don't realize how in Europe, for years material was reprinted there, and so it was all about American art. But then, not soon after, they started having their own artists, and they have some incredible artists, and there is a very dedicated market there, and they've always been passionate about strip art and all sorts of things. So yes.
Yeah, so he's been.
But that's not the reason we merged our company with. That's a story for another day. Not that it was anything, but it was.
Yeah, it was just a set of circumstances. And,
the right thing to do at the time, right?
Yes, that's exactly correct.
No,
that's exactly correct. Yes. Mhm.
Well, when the right opportunity comes along, you have to kind of you got to go for it if it really is the most comfortable, right decision for your business. I mean, I'm sure you guys were. I mean, I remember you were on the circuit for so long that was a lot of work, right? I mean, even as much as you enjoy it, in some weird ways, it probably was. It still felt like it was. I wouldn't say it was a burden, but right. I mean, setting up at shows and and having to move things around a lot. I mean, I don't know. I think there'd be a point in time where I might consider doing things differently. So when I'm a little bit older.
Well, it's not only that. We were still doing printed catalogs, so
Yeah.
how arduous that is.
Oh yeah.
Doing the prints and traveling and getting material. When you're doing your own auction, you're not only responsible for getting the consignments, but you're doing the production work, you're doing the promotion, you're doing everything you guys do. And there was a set of circumstances where there was an illness in our family, and because of that, it made us rethink. And Jim found out about it, and he had been pursuing us for years. When he first wanted to start a thing, and so he's been persistent for many years, 20 years, whatever it's been, and so it was the right time to do something like that.
Well, no one would fault you for that. I mean, a lot of great people end up at Heritage, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's Jim attracts good, talented people who've got a good history in the hobby, and or just not in just our hobby, but in all collectibles, across the spectrum. I mean, so West is going to bed. Good night, West.
Good night.
See, yeah,
thank you.
We wouldn't have thought it would have gone 2 hours, but so listen, I don't want to keep you any longer. I'm gonna, because I actually have some work I've got to finish up tonight. But this has been a lot of fun, and I've got you penciled in for April 4th to do the preview. And I'll tell you what, tomorrow I'll send you a couple dates, in the future for May or June, and I'll let you guys pick the next time we're going to have you on, and we'll pick one of these segments from your past, whether it's Frazetta or those Christie's auctions, or I'll just let you pick which time period you want to talk about next, and we'll focus on that. I think that any of those would be great. I'd love to talk about Frazetta. I mean, as close as I am to the Frazetta Museum, I never went to it, and all these years. I'm such an idiot. I don't know why I never did, but I regret that I never made it out there yet.
It's still there, but never in the same form,
right?
That it was when Ellie and Frank were alive. She breathed life into that museum, and I think just things are different now. But it was something to behold. Yeah.
No, I regret it. But
thank you, Dino.
Yep.
Good night, Dino.
Dino says good night, as does Lori. And
thank you, Lori.
Mel thanks you as well. Oh, everybody's thank you. Rich, Danny's as well. And so, all right. Well, listen, I'm going to call it. But again, Joe, I'll be in touch. And Nadia, thank you so much for staying up late.
Thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it.
Oh, no, absolute pleasure. I wish I would have had you guys on sooner. We could be on episode 8 by now. If I had started a couple of years ago, but we'll get there.
We'll get there.
All right. So thank you for tuning in, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.